Welcome to the ONC HTI-1 Proposed Rule Overview Information Session number 1. My name is Tom Deneen with Kaufman & Associates and will be assisting with the logistical support for the Zoom session. To ask questions, click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. However, please note that there are restrictions to what questions that can be answered due to the Administrative Procedure Act. Additionally, we ask that you select the speaker view option located at the top right side of your Zoom interface. This will allow you to see the speaker as they present or share information. Finally, please be aware that today's session is being recorded. Closed captioning is available by clicking on the CC icon at the bottom of your screen. I will now turn it over to Mickey Tripathi.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We're really delighted to be here today to present to you a synthesis and summary of the HTI-1 rule, as we call it now, and you'll hear more about that as we discuss the rule. Let me just give a sort of a policy framework for what the rule encompasses, and then I'll turn it over to the team who will be able to dive into the details of this. So ONC goals have been focused on 4 things. One is keep building the digital foundation. We spent a lot of time and effort over the last decade investing in electronic health records and putting those in place to the point that now 97% of hospitals and over 80% of ambulatory providers across the country are using certified electronic health records. We know there are still gaps though, so we want to keep building that digital foundation. Second is making interoperability easy. So we want to do everything we can to create mechanisms and structures to allow for the sharing of information and to make that as easy as possible to reduce the burden of that and to reduce the threshold to allow people to be able to share information as easily as possible. Third is to promote information sharing. So to be able to use those technologies and those capabilities, that digital foundation, interoperability mechanisms to encourage appropriate sharing with patients, with providers, with other important stakeholders involved in healthcare delivery. And then finally, ensuring appropriate use. So once you've got that digital foundation, you're sharing information, how do we have some appropriate guardrails and some certain expectations about that the information is being used appropriately on the behalf of the best interests of the patient? So how does this rule kind of map to those? How does this rule help to forward those goals? Well, let me just touch on a number of things, and then, as I said, I'll turn it over to the team to provide more detail on them. Going back now to keep building the digital foundation. We've got that foundation of electronic health records with a critical part of the healthcare delivery spectrum. Certainly doesn't cover all of it, but we've got a critical mass now on electronic health records. The US CDI is now a very important foundational aspect of our healthcare delivery system, forming what in many ways is kind of the minimum data set of the healthcare delivery system. And the US CDI version 3 now is in the proposal to be the requirement to be supported by certified electronic health record vendors to keep expanding in a judicious way the ability for us to be able to have an expectation about standardized information, and in particular to support additional needs related to health equity, as well as other dimensions that are important to individual care. There are also aspects or proposals in the rule to further institutionalize the EHR certification program, or the Health IT certification program. As we know, that's playing an important role in laying that foundation. And we have further, proposals here to further institutionalize that and to make that more, a part of the, year-on-year activity, and to set appropriate expectations and a good cadence for the industry to be able to keep moving forward with developing needed functionality, but also doing it with with an eye toward minimizing burden, and also having it be something that that the industry can accommodate, given all the various needs that the industry obviously is moving forward on. Second, as we think about making interoperability easier, I would point to 2 things. One is the continuing to bolster FHIR API requirements to achieve that goal of access that was in the 21st Century Cures Act about having access without special effort. So elements related to furthering the Smart on FHIR framework with requirements on authentication, authorization, token introspection, and a standardized representation of endpoints or service-based URLs is an important part of continuing to build that corpus, that foundation of FHIR-based capabilities. The other aspect of it is TEFCA and allowing actors to leverage TEFCA to assist with compliance with information blocking rules, so that they have a better way and a more sort of out of the box way of being able to be in compliance with the rules, but most important, actually being able to share information in more routinized ways and in ways that better allow them to be able to deliver clinical and business value to other stakeholders, to themselves, and to providers. A part of that also is part of the TEFCA piece of that is going back to that, requiring standardized endpoints that convey the underlying healthcare organizations behind those endpoints to enhance finding, the organizations in a scalable way. TEFCA is critically important to the scalability of FHIR APIs, and that standardization of endpoints and the healthcare organizations underneath those endpoints is an important element that TEFCA will be able to, be able to leverage for the scalability of FHIR and interoperability encompassed in that. Public health, another aspect of interoperability. There are technical standards now that we're proposing for electronic case reporting. As many of you may know, there is a requirement, or there is a certification requirement related to electronic case reporting from the 2015 edition and the Cures update to the 2015 edition, but those were functional requirements. We are now moving forward with a technical requirement for electronic case reporting to help advance public health interoperability. And then finally, we fully intend to advance FHIR-based capabilities, having put in place now with the Cures edition rule, with the Cures rule that went fully into effect as it relates to FHIR API requirements at the end of December of 2022, with the requirement that that all certified electronic health records records that have an API, a certified API, have that be a FHIR R4 compliant API. Now that we've got that base now in place, we fully intend to move forward with more advanced FHIR-based capabilities, because certainly the expectation wasn't that we would stop with read-only APIs supporting the USDI. It was the additional capabilities and the promise of FHIR-based capabilities that that is about the future. So we've got RFIs in the rule related to lab interoperability and with advanced FHIR capabilities such as CDS hooks, subscriptions, smart health links. And very much welcome industry input on the opportunities for us to rapidly advance and mature those kinds of capabilities as well. The third goal is, as I said, promoting information sharing. So what are the things that we can do to leverage, to have stakeholders leverage the tools, the digital foundation, the mechanisms for interoperability, to actually use them and to promote information sharing. So got a number of proposals in there that are about refining the information blocking requirements to encourage the use of standard-based information exchange mechanisms where available, so that we have a greater encouragement and greater sort of incentives on the part of all parties to exchange information and to use that in ways that that leverage open industry standards-based approaches. And then finally, in the area of ensuring appropriate use, there are a number of aspects in there that I think are important. One is that there are certainly mounting concerns about privacy and the privacy of healthcare information, as we know, and certainly those have been heightened over the last 9 months. So there are a couple of things in there in the proposals that are both very specific proposals, as well as really ways for us to get further comment from industry on ways that we can move forward together. One in particular is about, for example, is the revocation of authorization of access to an API by a patient within an hour. So that would essentially allow a patient who may have changed their mind about allowing a particular app or a particular service to have access to their information through a FHIR API, for them to be able to make that request and have the assurance that within an hour that request will be honored and that information will be shut off. Another area is that there is certainly growing interest in being able to restrict sharing of certain types of data under certain circumstances. And again, over the last 9 months, that has become even more acute. We recognize that's a very complex area. That's been a complex area because it is not just about technology. It's about it's about policy. It's about documentation practices and conventions. It's about different definitions of sensitive data. It's about different types of consent requirements based on types of data. So we recognize that that it is a complex area. On the other hand, we also want to be responsive to the growing calls for greater protections of patient privacy and for patients to be able to more explicitly express their preferences and have those potentially honored in certain ways as it relates to the sharing of information. So we've got a set of proposals related to patient requested restrictions on the sharing of information. There's a number of different options that are in there as well. But the main point of that of that whole part of the proposal is really to get comment from industry. Because we, again, want to be responsive to the growing demand for these, but we also recognize the complexity of it. And so that's really, sort of an appeal to industry to see what is available, where there have been advances, and to get ideas from industry on where we might be able to move forward through technology, if appropriate and if applicable. Finally, there is a set of proposals in what we call predictive decision support interventions, which relates to AI algorithms and other types of tools that are used for predictive interventions. It's extending the sort of the certification approach that we've had in the past related to clinical decision support, but now making it applicable to the whole suite of new tools that are now being made available, all in the area of that general category of predictive interventions, but certainly encompasses and embraces algorithms, AI, machine learning, all of those kinds of capabilities as well. We've worked closely with our federal partners, including the FDA, OCR, FTC, to get as much consistency in complementing each other's authorities and each other's sort of regulatory approaches in this area. And what we have done in this is try to provide some capabilities for transparency to users about the algorithms that a certified technology developer has incorporated in the EHR system, so that the users, however that's defined, either as an organization or as the end user, has the ability to have an understanding of what algorithms are incorporated in that technology and certain characteristics of that of those algorithms that might help that user determine whether that algorithm is appropriate for the use that is intended. So we've got a set of requirements related to sort of what we used to call source attributes, is increasingly be called a model card or a nutrition label. The idea being that that there should be transparency about the algorithms that are in that technology, so that the customer has the ability to decide whether they want to use them. It's not about regulating those in any way, those algorithms. We believe that should be the choice of the customer, and we certainly don't want to stifle innovation in that regard. But we do want to create transparency so that we have greater awareness on the part of providers, and greater awareness that they can provide to their patients about about how algorithms are being used and their confidence in the use of those. The other aspect that's in there is related to governance. To have some type of more formalized risk management process that will help to vet the algorithms that are incorporated in technology. We don't specify exactly what that should look like. We're not sort of dictating what a risk management approach would look like, nor are we requiring that that all of the outcomes of that process be publicly available. But we are sort of requiring in the proposal that the certified technology developer have some type of formalized sort of risk management approach to the way they incorporate predictive decision support interventions, and that they make that publicly available, just the process itself, so that everyone has sort of an understanding of how that certified technology developer is approaching this very important area, so that we have greater visibility into that. So I think that's a very important aspect as we think about the the world of algorithms and the important role that they can play on behalf of providers and patients. And we're very excited to get industry feedback on that. So hopefully that gives you a framing of how the rule helps to advance the 4 key goals from that ONC has been pushing very hard on. Now let me turn it over to the team to dive into the details. And thank you again for attending today.
Yes, thank you, Mickey. Thanks for providing that framework. And again, thanks all for joining us today. We're going to give you a little bit more, we're going to go through a little bit more detail than what Mickey provided on the aspects of the rule. I'm going to go over the first few slides, and then my colleagues will be joining us. Jeff Smith's going to go over the decision support intervention and algorithmic transparency and the insights condition. And finally, Rachel Nelson will go through the information blocking proposals. Next slide. So first, bear with me while I go through the disclaimers that we need to set out in the beginning here. So the materials contained in this presentation are based on the proposals in the Health Data Technology and Interoperability Certification Program Updates, Algorithm Transparency, and Information Sharing Proposed Rule. Like I said, we do have a shorthand version of that title that we'll go through. While every effort has been made to ensure the accuracy of the restatement of these proposals, this presentation is not a legal document. The official proposals are contained in the proposed rule. ONC must protect the rulemaking process and comply with the Administrative Procedure Act. During the rulemaking process, we can only present the information that is in the proposed rule as it is contained in the proposed rule. We cannot interpret that information nor clarify or provide any further guidance. We cannot address any comments made by anyone attending the presentation or consider any such comments in the rulemaking process unless they're submitted through the formal comment submission process as specified in the Federal Register. This communication is produced and disseminated at U.S. taxpayer expense. Okay, next slide. So what are the three things that people are going to want to know about this rule? Next slide. First thing that I had mentioned was the name, the title of the rule. In the past, we've had all different titles of our rules. Most recently was the ONC Cures Act final rule. And what we've done in this rule is we're starting a new naming convention. Hopefully we'll make things easier for folks. So based on the prefix of health data, technology, and interoperability, and the suffix of the title, we will call certification, program updates, algorithm transparency, and information sharing. And basically the suffix of the rule would be the topics or the particular items that the rule covers. The acronym that we intend to use is HTI. And this would be the first rule under this new naming convention. So we propose the shorthand to be HTI-1 proposed rule. And as folks are aware, we do have other rules, as you've probably seen in the unified agenda. And there's a second rule that we're working on that would also follow this naming convention. Hence it would be HTI-2 proposed then final rule. Next slide. So what's in the rule? The rule generally breaks down into these 6 categories, which I'll briefly go over, but they're further addressed in the presentation. So in this rule, we have a new regulatory approach in addition to the new the title approach. So we're going with an additionless, which I'll go over next, an additionless criteria. We have certification standards and functionality updates, decision support interventions, and algorithmic transparency. The insights condition, which in the Cures Act is called the EHR reporting program, information blocking, and then we have requests for information or opportunities for comment on a number of items that we specifically call out in the proposed rule. Next slide. Okay, and next, probably most importantly, is what's the why? And as Nikki had stated, ONC's priorities, I'm going to focus more on specifically how we're relating back to the Cures Act, different executive orders, and how we're leveraging health IT and advancing interoperability. So for the EHR reporting program, over the past couple of years, we've undertook a process to implement and fulfill the responsibility as laid out in the Cures Act. The Cures Act required that this program become a condition of certification for health IT developers under the ONC Health IT certification program. And we'll talk more about that, or Jeff will talk more about that later in this presentation. But that's the one item. And then APIs and that allow EHI to be accessed, exchanged, and used without special effort. And that's very important to us. And then what we anticipate as being another iterative process that continues with this rule as we provide more regulatory certainty for actors and remain cognizant of and responsive to the identification of reasonable and necessary activities that do not constitute information blocking. And looking at the goals of the Biden-Harris administration executive orders, With regard to Executive Order 13994, I think you'll find this executive order aligns perfectly with the work we're doing by the proposals regarding USCDI version 3, electronic case reporting, and the application programming interface updates. In addition to that, we're committed to advancing equity, and this rule is consistent with the administration's executive orders on this matter. With regard to leveraging health IT and advancing interoperability, we focus on health data, health technology, and ultimately health interoperability, hence renaming our rulemaking approach. You will see this leveraging of health IT and adherence to interoperability throughout this rule, whether it's through the USCDI version 3 updates, API standards, or what we are calling for shorthand the update and provide requirements under the ONC Health IT certification program, with the effort to make health data more readily available when and where it is needed. Next slide. So first, as I mentioned, I'm going to go over what we mean by an additionless certification criteria. We'll talk pretty high level about some of these items, but again, obviously, please read through the rule and provide your comments to us through regulations.gov. Next slide. So for folks familiar with our program and have been for many years, you're likely familiar with the concept of editions. For example, we started with the 2011 edition, we had the 2014 edition, and most recently the 2015 edition. And those editions mark different sets of certification criteria that developers coming into the program would need to be certified to comply with the requirements of the program. So in this proposed rule, we are moving to an editionless framework. And what that means is focusing more on the need and establishing a single set of certification criteria. The developer could update to just that specific certification criteria it needed to, instead of updating the product to the whole realm of the whole edition as they had done in the past. And some of the benefits that we lay out here is that the CERT program and the health IT developers allows them to more effectively utilize new and updated standards in a timely manner without waiting for a totally new edition to come out through the regulatory process. Allows users of health IT to work in partnership with health IT developers to update their systems for new standards or functionality, and supports users of health IT by reducing potential confusion of tracking use of different editions of certified health IT. So overall, this approach we're hoping would be easier for the developers and easier for folks to track this new method. Next slide. So as we go to this editionless certification criteria, what we propose to do is clearly establish applicability and expiration timelines for the certification criteria and standards. So we're thinking we want to make sure that the criteria and standards are used at the right time, making sure that they're ones that are no longer applicable, and where a newer standard exists, that the health ID developers would update to those newer standards or newer certification criteria. And you will see throughout the rule in the different certification criteria and in the standards, different timelines for when developers would need to be in compliance. Next slide. And as doing this, we propose two different forms of compliance. So one for the certification criteria within section 173.15, we propose to add a language specifically that the health IT developers with a health IT module certified to any revised certification criteria. And we include in the definitions what we mean by the term revised certification criterion. But anyways, with that, these health IT developers must update their modules and provide such updated health IT to their customers in accordance with the timelines defined by that specific certification criterion. In addition to that compliance requirement in the certification criteria, as you remember, in the Cures Act final rules where we first introduced the assurance condition, and in the assurances condition, we expanded that so that it would include in the condition portion that a health IT developer must provide an assurance that it will not interfere with a customer's timely access to interoperable health IT. And then in the maintenance of certification, we include the update that the health IT developer must update their health IT module, and they must provide all their health IT modules certified to a revised certification criterion to its customers, and that it must comply with the timeliness requirements. So a health IT developer must follow any of the timeliness requirements identified in the rule. Next slide. Okay, so next we'll go over some certification standards and functionality updates. Next slide. So this is just an overview of the select standards and certification criteria that we propose to either update. As you can see, that fourth bullet down under the certification criteria, we do propose a new certification criteria, the patient requested restrictions criterion. And I just wanted to note with regard to the standards, the US core and CCDA release cycles, we are aware that they are being updated. So we do include language in the proposed rule that we do intend to update to the latest versions or the latest release that are that support USCDI version 3, because we do propose to adopt USCDI version 3 in this rule. But because they are not currently published, we couldn't specifically propose that, but we do note that in the preamble of the rule. So please take note of that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so for USCDI, this concept was first adopted in the Cures Act final rule as a regulatory standard that ONC was a steward of. We established the baseline for data elements required to be accessible for certified health IT to support interoperable health information exchange. As you're probably aware, USCDI replaced the common core data set, common clinical data set that was used in the 2015 edition versions of the ONC certification program criteria. Right now, USCDI version 1 is considered the minimum data set required for interoperability to support patient care and facilitate patient access using health IT. Next slide. So this is a screenshot from the data elements within USCDI version 3. We can see the latest updates made to USCDI version 3, including the new data classes and associated elements, especially for health status and health insurance, as well as reclassifications for health concerns as health status and rolling in of smoking status into that data class. You also will see changes to patient demographic information data elements, such as name, suffix, and sex. Next slide. So in this proposed rule, we do propose to adopt USCDI version 3 as the new baseline for certification. Again, this will be codified in section 172.13. Again, that's where you would see what we discussed a few slides back, the timing requirements as to when developers would need to be in compliance with the new standard, the USCDI version 3. And expanding the data elements and data classes included in USCDI increases the amount of data available to be used and exchanged for patient care. The health IT modules certified to a criteria that reference USCDI would also need to be updated to be in compliance with USCDI version 3. And those timelines, again, are set out in the certification criteria, are set out in the standards, excuse me, for those specific criteria. Next slide. So the minimum standards code sets, we also propose to provide updates to those as well. So these code sets are ones that are updated more frequently. And we propose to update these versions for some of the vocabulary standards used in several of the certification criteria. Many of these code sets include SNOMED, LOINC, the NDC, CDC race and ethnicity code set, and RX norm. And this would promote semantic interoperability, accurate quality measure, public health reporting, and support research. So next slide. So we also propose some revisions to the standardized API and related API condition updates. Together, these proposed revisions would expand the data available through standardized APIs and require health IT modules that are certified to the API criterion 170.315 G10 to adopt newer versions of adopted standards. Some of these benefits include enabling increased capability and functionality for individuals to share information with their apps of their choice, addressing some privacy and security concerns by empowering the patients to limit the app's access at a granular level, improve security through adoption of enhanced authentication and authorization requirements, and improve the availability of service-based URLs for patient access to their information without, again, that special effort. Next slide. Electronic case reporting. We propose to revise the electronic case reporting criterion to require that the health IT modules that support electronic case reporting using consensus-based industry-developed HL7 CDA and FHIR standards. The developers would have until the end of 2024 to adopt these new implementation guides to provide the functionality. And some of these benefits, as noted on the slide, improve the interoperability, implementation consistency, promote bidirectional exchange of health data between healthcare providers and public authorities, promote the sharing of standardized knowledge artifacts related to electronic case reporting, and enable the use of a standard version advancement process as newer standards emerge. Okay, next slide. Okay, and this is what I mentioned, the new certification criterion that we propose in this proposed rule. So in any we propose that any data that's expressed in the US CDI, the data elements included in 172.13, that a health IT developer must enable a user to be able to flag such data that needs to be restricted from being subsequently used or disclosed, and be able to prevent any data flagged from being included in a use or disclosure. We also propose to modify the privacy and security framework to add in the new patient requested restrictions criterion. And we also propose to modify 173.15 E1 to state that patients and their authorized representatives must be able to use an internet-based method to request a restriction to be applied for any data expressed in the US CDI standard. As we move to continue to improve interoperability, we are aware of the imperative to protect health data privacy. We're also cognizant that the concept of sensitive data is dynamic to the specific individual. And the goal of this proposal specifically is to enable the user of a certified health IT module to implement a process to restrict the data from use or disclosure in response to whatever the patient requests. This supports the HIPAA privacy rules, right to request a restriction on uses and disclosures, and advances health IT tools to support patient-directed privacy requests for the data that the patient deems sensitive. Next slide. Okay, thank you all. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Smith to talk about the next upcoming items.
All right, thanks, Kate. Before we jump into this set of slides, I did want to kind of make a general announcement about the history of where we're coming from on this criterion revision. And that is that ONC's certification program has maintained requirements related to CDS really since its genesis. And it was part of what was included in the HITECH Act as a qualified electronic health record. This definition included clinical decision support. Many people may not know that we've had requirements around CDS for that long, but it was really back in 2012 that the Health IT Policy Committee at the time recommended that we develop a certification criterion that was looks more like what you can find today as part of our requirements. And specifically what they said is that health IT modules should support CDS that displays or source or citation information related to that CDS, that the module rather is configurable based on patient context, that the health IT module supports CDS that is presented at relevant points in the clinical workflow and includes alerts presented to users who can actually act on those alerts. And then finally, the Health IT Policy Committee recommended that this certification criterion is integrated with the EHR, that integrates CDS with the EHR. So if you're not familiar, I would highly encourage that you go to Google or your favorite search engine and you type in certification ONC and then the magic letters A9. And I think what you'll come up with is the page that includes a lot of the information that's historic and really kind of sets the bedrock for what we're about to talk to. So next slide, please. All right, so we're going to do a flyby of the proposals, and then I'm going to try and set the stage for kind of why we're doing this, and then we'll talk a little bit about the particulars. But of course, all of the details, the nitty-gritty details are in the proposed rule. So again, this is a revised version of an existing criterion, and it's important to understand that because really the form and the mechanics of the criterion are steeped in what already exists today. But really what we're doing is updating this criterion to reflect an array of contemporary and emerging software functionalities that are intended to aid users in decision-making in healthcare. And that does, of course, include artificial intelligence and machine learning, which has become increasingly more commonly used for all kinds of decision-making support. So at a high level, the revisions include a new definition that's proposed for what we're calling predictive decision support interventions. And I think it's important here to underscore that we're changing the name from CDS to DSI because we think that decision-making support is being applied to a bunch of things, not inclusive of, but beyond kind of clinical workflows. We're also looking to update the base EHR definition to include the proposed revisions to DSI. And this is important because the A9 certification criterion for CDS, the CDS criterion is currently part of the base EHR, and we are proposing that the new DSI criterion will also be included in the base EHR definition, and that has implications for user adoption through CMS payment policies. We also are requiring that health IT modules that enable or interface with predictive DSIs provide relevant technical and performance information to users. So I'll underscore here something that has come up in other conversations around we're not requiring that health IT modules that are certified to this new B11 or this new DSI criterion. We're not requiring them to support predictive algorithms or predictive DSIs, but if they do, then they will be required to provide new transparency information, as Mickey was talking about, transparency source attributes. We're also proposing to require that certified health IT developers who enable or interface with predictive DSIs also employ or engage in risk management practices. And this is really the governance piece that Mickey was speaking to. And then last but not least, we are proposing to require that certified health IT developers with health IT modules certified to the DSI criterion, whether or not they have predictive DSIs, also participate in real world testing. Currently, CDS is not part of that. And as we move the CDS criterion into the DSI criterion and that becomes part of the B criteria, then those modules will be subject to real world testing and those accompanying requirements. Next slide, please. All right, so here's a little bit of a foundation on why we're doing this. I think there's numerous pieces, numerous answers to the question why, but I think at a core level, we are looking to optimize the use of predictive and other DSIs in healthcare. And we understand that clinicians and others are hesitant to use predictive DSIs for various reasons, some of which is they don't trust them, others of which is that the predictive DSIs have actually proven to be harmful in certain circumstances. And so we believe that transparency is going to play a key role in optimizing the use of predictive DSIs. So as a high level outcome that we're looking to achieve with our requirements here, we hope to improve transparency regarding how predictive DSIs are designed, developed, trained, evaluated, and should be used. We are really looking to force transparency into the ingredients so that nutrition labels can be composed of those ingredients. But I'll also note that we're very careful to try and ensure that intellectual property type of information isn't required as part of this. So much in the same way that you can look at a can of Campbell's soup and see what's in it, you don't know how it's made. And that is really kind of one of the key things to keep in mind. Also, in terms of trustworthiness, we know that this is a key aspect of many current administration priorities, the White House blueprint for trustworthy AI, the NIST risk management framework centers trustworthiness as a key characteristic that they're shooting for. And likewise, that's what these policies are meant to align towards. We are also hoping to support consistency in the availability of predictive DSI information so that users can determine for themselves the quality of the DSI and its recommendations and understand to a certain degree whether the recommendations are fair, appropriate, valid, effective, and safe. And this concept of faves has really been kind of a North Star for us as we think through the kinds of predictive algorithms that we would like to see propagate throughout the marketplace. And then last but certainly not least, we have a host of proposals related to health equity by design. This has been a central policy priority of ONC and of this administration. And we're looking to make sure that we can help address bias and health disparities that potentially have been perpetuated by predictive DSIs and expand the use of these technologies in ways that are safer, more appropriate, and more equitable. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's a really important axis of our policy, and that is the decision to support intervention for predictive DSIs. We do propose this as a new definition in the Code of Federal Regulations, and stated simply, it's technology intended to support decision-making based on algorithms and models that derive relationships from training or example data, and then are used to produce outputs or an output related to the example or training data there. So in terms of kind of going a level deeper, you can see the definition there. The technology really is meant to estimate, it says that it estimates the value based on relationships that are learned in training data and then produces some kind of predictive output based on what it's learned. This definition is really agnostic as to the specific purpose or intended use of the algorithm. It does not convey or consider a level of risk associated with its use, and is really not dependent on who developed the algorithm or the model. So it can be developed by someone other than the health IT developer. We provide some examples here, and I think it's important to understand that we're thinking pretty big picture. We think that these could be simple statistics or regression models used in risk calculators that are common throughout patient care today, or as well as more complex machine learning models, including neural networks and gradient boosted machines, as well as large language models that, of course, are part of the pre-trained transformers or ChatGPT, which is obviously of high interest these days. And then last but not least, the outputs of predictive models may be presented in an array of forms that DSIs can take. So we're trying to cast a fairly wide net in terms of defining what this technology is for purposes of our program. Next slide. Okay, this is kind of the logic of some of our requirements, and we've embedded some of the requirements here. I'll try and go through this and the next slide quickly because they contain a lot of the same information. But really, the logic here is that data transparency, predictive DSI transparency, and organizational transparency will result in more trustworthy algorithms. And so we've got a host of requirements around trying to bring more transparency that the data around the data that DSIs and predictive DSIs use. We've got policies in there that would pertain to both DSIs and predictive DSIs. And then we've got a host of requirements around predictive DSI transparency, and we've spoken to some of that already, just in terms of source attributes, information, and really trying to give users access to information that would help them understand whether or not the recommendation is fair, appropriate, valid, effective, and safe. And then organizational transparency. We know from experience in the financial sector that having information on the intended use of a model and what training data it was used on or was used for is incomplete, and that we need to have assurances that the organizations working on developing these modules also have a degree of competencies when it comes to governance and when it comes to risk management. And so we've got some requirements there. Next slide, please. Okay, so here I recognize that the type is a little small, but please note you'll have access to these slides and you can pore over them if only with a magnifying glass if necessary. But here is where we try to break down the various requirements around promoting transparency and trustworthy and predictive DSIs. I won't go through this line by line, but it follows much of the same as the logic I described on the previous slide. And that is that we are really looking to bring transparency to the technical and performance, as well as socio-technical and governance aspects of developers who develop predictive DSIs, and as well as those other firms that health IT modules enable or interface with that produce predictive DSIs. I'll note here on the right, our oversight capacities are going to follow pretty much what we already have in place for this. We propose to move the DSI criterion into the B criteria, which would subject it to real-world testing. And then the requirements around real-world testing would follow what we do today, which is annual reports that are posted on the Chapel, both as plans and then subsequent results. And then I would also say, just as at a basic level, I think Nikki spoke to intervention risk management practices being made publicly available. Those would be summaries of how the developer generally thinks about governance and risk management related to predictive DSIs that they enable or interface with. And then the more detailed risk management practices would not be made publicly under our proposals, but rather would be made available to ONC upon request from ONC. Next slide. Okay, so really, what does this mean for patients, providers, developers, and industry? I think I saw a question in the Q&A box earlier around whether patients would have access to the kinds of transparency information that we would require. And I would say that we're looking for feedback on that. We actually ask a question around whether we should pursue policies that would enable electronic access to the DSIs and the transparency information around DSIs that we are requiring through something like a patient portal. We also ask for public access and whether or not we should pursue policies around making the transparency requirements that we're proposing publicly accessible. And I think there's both pros and cons behind that. So if this is of interest to you, I highly encourage you to comment on that portion of the proposed rule, and we would be glad to take your feedback on that. For providers, I think one of the things that we heard loud and clear across various listening sessions and engagements with interested parties is that they simply don't have trust, and they don't have information to trust some of the predictive algorithms that are being potentially applied for patient care. And we really do hope that what we can do with our policies is create a level playing field of consistently available information, and that information will help users be able to determine the difference between poor and high quality predictive models. And we also think, of course, that this will help improve both how these predictive models are used for individual patients, but also for patient populations, which hopefully will start to get at some of the challenges that we've seen with bias and health disparities. For developers, I think we really hope that our proposals walk the fine line between being flexible and prescriptive. We know that that's a balance, and we think that we've struck it. We think we've got to a place that does make that balance, but we're looking for feedback just in terms of the number of source attributes and the amount of information. We've had a long-standing requirement that CDS, that bibliographic information, information around who developed the CDS, and financial information be available to users via direct display, drill down, or link out. This has been stated in preamble going back to 2015, yet we know that's not always the case. So we're making it a very explicit part of these requirements. And we hope that that will help mitigate any concerns about information overload or usability problems, because clinicians ought to be able to just drill down or link out into this information if they'd like to. I think the other really important thing here is that we're looking to create a market conditions for developers who do produce high quality predictive DSIs to have an advantage over those with poor quality predictive DSIs. We did a blog series over the last year. I think we've got 5 of them out now. One of them looked at asking the question whether or not we've got a market for lemons. And so, I think one of the things that we're hoping is to improve the overall landscape for predictive DSIs and improve the quality. And then, of course, at the industry level, we know that there are various groups out there that are looking to develop model cards or develop nutrition labels. And we're hoping that these source attributes will provide that basic level of information, those ingredients that those groups can then use. And I think from there, we can start to have conversations about the right form and format for this information to enter the workflow. But without access to that information, without consistently having access to that information, a lot of these questions and ideas around giving nutrition labels is lacking ingredients. So really at the basic level, we're looking to support an information ecosystem that would enable prospective and proactive and ongoing assessment of predictive models in healthcare. And I do think that will have long-lasting and potentially far-reaching implications. So with that, I think we're done with the DSI section. Next slide. Okay, fantastic. We're on to insights, which I also have the pleasure of discussing. So next slide. I know we're getting short on time, so I'll try and pick up the pace just a little bit. All right, so the insights condition and maintenance of certification requirement. This is actually the EHR reporting program. This is one of the final big pieces of the 21st Century Cures Act that we're looking to implement. There are, of course, other pieces, but this was one of the big pieces that we've talked about in the Cures Act final rule that said we were working on. Indeed, here we are. This was required by Congress, and we were told to develop a EHR reporting program that would develop measures really that would describe the performance of electronic health records or health IT along 4 key dimensions that included security, usability and user-centered design, interoperability, and then conformance to certification testing. And for this initial round of measures, we chose to focus on interoperability, and I think it's really important to frame it as the first round. We know that there are other areas that the Cures Act directed us to look at, like security and usability. But for this first effort, this first round, we chose to focus on interoperability. Big picture, this program is meant to provide information that would address information gaps in the marketplace, that would provide insights on the uses of specific certified health IT functionalities, and then provide information about customers' experiences with health IT. So that's why the change from EHR reporting program to insights condition. Next slide. Okay, so real quickly, this has been an ongoing project for actually a number of years now. It started with the Urban Institute, who produced a report, and that was survey instrument of sorts. And then they got to work on the EHR reporting program that was meant to be directed at developers. And they worked on developing draft measures based on a whole bunch of research and input from stakeholders. This included health IT developers and health IT measurement experts and a whole cast of other interested parties, I should say. And then they looked at trying to provide input on basically the feasibility of these measures. And this resulted in a 2021 report that actually contained many of the same types of measures that we'll walk through today. And really our process has been to use the Urban Institute's measures and revise those based on feedback from the HITAC as well as feedback from a public comment period. Next slide, please. Okay, so at a really high level, and I know this is going to be inadequate for those of you who are itching to get deep into the insights condition, these are the areas and the measures that we are proposing. I won't actually go through all of these. I'll say that we're looking to measure interoperability along 4 key areas. That includes individual access to electronic health information. We're looking to have measures around care, clinical care information exchange, as well as public health information exchange. And then last but not least, we're looking to get interoperability insights around standards adoption and conformance. And we've got a host of measures in each one of those areas. I'll highlight here that ONC has a bunch of measure specifications that provide all the information you could want to know, or at least we hope it gets you close to that for each and every one of these measures. And I know that Canon and others have been pushing out a hyperlink to the ONC's landing page for all things HTI-1. So you'll be able to find the measure specs there, and we would love your feedback on those measure specifications. Okay, so next slide. This and the next slide, I'll talk just a little bit of mechanics for the program. So developers of certified health IT would be expected to report if they have at least 50 hospital customers or 500 clinician users across their certified health IT products. We were told explicitly in the Cures Act to develop measures being cognizant of small and startup developers, and this is one of the ways that we're doing that. If a health IT developer has products that are certified to specific criteria, and you saw those in the right-hand column on the previous slide, those are the relevant measures for them. If you've got a module that isn't certified to those criteria, then you don't have to report on anything. The developer also has to have users, obviously, associated with the criterion and the criteria. So you could, I suppose, find yourself in a scenario where you've got a product certified to a criterion that you've got more than 500 clinician users, but none of those users actually use that criterion. You could find yourself in that situation, I guess. So otherwise, the health ID developer is expected to report on these measures, and we would expect them to submit information on these measures via web-based form. And then to be determined at a later date, consistent with the requirements in the 21st Century Cures Act. And then those measures would be made publicly available. The results of those measures would be made publicly available on the ONC website. Next slide. Okay, so real quick, we're taking a staggered approach to this program and implementing it. This is mainly because we know some of these measures are going to be easier to report on than others. And so what we tried to do was identify those measures that we thought would be easier to report on, that those would be reported on earlier, and the measures that we thought would be more difficult based on conversations over the last 2 years, that those would come in during the second year of reporting. And then the idea would also be that we would get information on these measures every 6 months or so. Okay, I think that's the last slide for this. Perfect. I am going to take the microphone and toss it over to my colleague, Rachel, I believe.
Thanks, Jeff. I was having a little trouble getting my camera to start, but it looks like I'm ready to go. Information blocking. And I'm just putting a couple of reminders in the chat of where you can find the information blocking regulations as they stand today. And remember that what we're going to be talking about here is a new proposed definition, a parallel, I'll mention a parallel update or refinement to an existing definition of a specific term, and that all of these proposals fold into and refine the existing information blocking regulations in 45 CFR Part 171. So it could be a little difficult to picture them and how they work in the abstract. I'll try to give some navigational points as I go along, but it could be helpful to bear in mind or have beside you as you read the proposals in the proposed rule, the regulations as they stand today, kind of where these changes would go into place, whether they're new or changed. Pieces of text. Next slide, please. So this is the overview of the enhancements that we're going to briefly give highlight overview of today. I will try not to talk too fast, but also try to get done in time. So there is one proposed new definition, and the parallel proposal is to update, not really change in terms of what it would mean for folks, but update the Health IT Developer of Certified Health IT definition in step with the proposed definition of what it means to offer health IT. The exceptions that we're going to talk about are both existing exceptions that we would propose to revise one existing condition of the infeasibility exception and to add two new conditions or options for how actors could potentially satisfy that exception. We also propose a new condition or option for the satisfying the manner exception, and that new condition proposed for the manner exception would be specific to TSCA. And now, without further ado, let's dive right in to the next slide, which talks about the proposed definition of offer health IT. This would be specific to the purposes of the information blocking regulations, and there is no substitute for reading the actual proposed definition in the HTI-1 proposed rule. So I'm not going to read that to you here. I'm just going to describe it. In general terms, it would still include providing, supplying, or otherwise making available certified health IT under any arrangement or terms, except for certain beneficial and necessary activities that would be explicitly within the definition itself, excluded from what it means to offer health IT. It would explicitly clarify also that we do not interpret individuals or other entities to be offering health IT when they engage in activities such as certain donation and subsidized supply arrangements, specific implementation and use activities around certified health IT, or certain legal services arrangements. We think the benefits of this proposal start with giving clarity about the implications for an individual or entity's status under the information blocking regulations of them choosing to do something like making funding subsidies available or implementing certain features and uses of certified health IT. We also think it encourages beneficial arrangements under which healthcare providers in need can receive subsidies for the cost of obtaining, maintaining, or upgrading certified health IT. And we think it would give healthcare providers and others who use certified health IT certainty that doing things that are common and beneficial in an EHR-enabled environment will not be considered offering of certified health IT, regardless of who developed that health IT. We do not have a slide for this, but the parallel proposal is to modify or update, if you will, the definition of health IT developer of certified health IT in light of this proposed new definition of what it means to offer. And this update would simply provide clarity to healthcare providers who self-develop certified health IT for their own use and do not offer their certified health IT to others, that they would not be considered health IT developers of certified health IT for information blocking purposes under the updated definitions any more than they would be today. So that would, I think that parallel proposal just offers clarity. Next slide, please. Now, we're going to dive into the infeasibility exception. But before I do that, I do want to just remind everyone that this is an existing exception, and it has two pieces. One piece is a documentation condition, basically where to meet the infeasibility exception as a whole, you need to notify requesters that it's going to be infeasible for you to provide the requested access, exchange, or use of health IT or EHI. Pardon me, that was a misspeak on my part. And then in the other part, there's sort of a pick list of conditions, and you can satisfy one of this assortment of conditions along with the written notice requirement, and in order to satisfy the infeasibility exception in circumstances where the infeasibility exception is applicable. So, due to uncontrollable events, this is an existing condition of existing option for satisfying the infeasibility exception. The proposal is to revise the condition by replacing the words due to with because of, to make clear that a causal connection is needed to use this exception. The mere fact that an uncontrollable event occurred is not a sufficient basis on its own for an actor to meet the uncontrollable events condition of the infeasibility exception. The use of the words due to in the condition conveys that an actor must demonstrate a causal connection between not providing access, exchange, or use of EHI and the uncontrollable event. We think this makes clear that the actor must demonstrate a causal connection, and that it makes clear that the fact that it happened somewhere is not by itself enough. So the main benefit here, we've said, you know, as I've said twice, is clarity. To illustrate, for example, a public health emergency is listed as an uncontrollable event under the reg text of this condition. If the federal government or a state government were to declare a public health emergency, the mere fact of that declaration would not suffice for an actor to meet the condition. To meet the condition, the actor would need to demonstrate that the public health emergency actually caused the actor to be unable to provide access, exchange, or use of EHI for the facts and circumstances in question. The emergency need not be the only cause of a particular incapacity, but the actor needs to demonstrate that the public health emergency did in fact negatively impact the feasibility of that actor fulfilling access, exchange, or use of the EHI in the specific circumstances where the actor is claiming infeasibility. Next slide, please. Now, the first of the two new conditions that we have proposed for the infeasibility exception. So this would be another option on the list. It could be satisfied where the conditions are appropriate. So the third-party modification use condition would, this is the proposal, where a request to enable one or more third parties to modify EHI, including but not limited to creation and deletion functionality, could be considered infeasible unless the request is from a healthcare provider requesting such use from an actor that is its business associate. So key point to note there, the request could be coming either directly from the healthcare provider to the actor that is their business associate, or it could be coming from the provider, but through another business associate of the same healthcare provider. That would be considered a request from the healthcare provider either way, direct or sent through another of their business associates. And this new condition could not be met by the actor's practice of not fulfilling the request for use of EHI when that request is coming from the healthcare provider. Now, where a healthcare provider or another of its business associates hands you the request for the provider's business associate actor, the request to create modification capability, if that is infeasible under the facts and circumstances, the infeasible under the circumstances condition remains another option separate from this one under the infeasibility exception, and could be satisfied in those circumstances where the request is coming ultimately from the healthcare provider, and therefore it kicks out of coverage under this condition. We think the benefit of this proposed new option for satisfying the infeasibility exception include that it reduces actor burden and uncertainty. There are fewer documentation requirements compared to under the infeasible under the circumstances condition, which is in place today. There would be no need to determine if another exception applies to the request, such as the security exception. And note, however, other exceptions beyond even the infeasibility exception may still apply in various facts and circumstances. Next slide, please. The second proposed new condition of the infeasibility exception, so this would be another kind of option on the list of sets of circumstances where fulfilling the access, exchange, or use may be infeasible, is the manner exception exhausted condition. Now, this is separate than would be, as proposed, separate from the infeasibility under the circumstances. And this proposal would apply a 3-point test. The Act 1, the actor could not reach agreement with the requester in accordance with the manner exception, or was technically unable to fulfill a request for EHI in the manner requested. The actor, number 2, offered all alternative manners in accordance with the alternative manners provision of the manner exception for the EHI access, exchange, or use requested, but could not reach agreement with the requester. And the third of the 3-part test, the actor cannot provide the same access, exchange, or use of the requested electronic health information to a substantial number of individuals or entities that are similarly situated to the requester and still satisfy this particular proposed condition. Couple things to point out. On the second part of the 3-part test, the proposed rule does include an alternative proposal discussed in the preamble, which would be in comparison to the actor having offered all alternative manners in the 171-301B portion of the manner exception? Would it be, as the alternative proposal would be to say as few as 2 alternative manners would have to have been offered to satisfy this prong of the test. A couple other points now on the third prong. I saved these for last because there's a lot more, potentially a lot more to unpack there. I'm checking the time. So the currently provided, they would need to be currently providing the same manner to a substantial number of similarly situated. And I'm going to pick out a couple here to talk about. I really encourage everyone who's interested in this to read the entirety of the preamble discussion of this proposed new condition in the proposed rule. If you have comments, feedback that you want to share, then please follow the instructions on the Federal Register website to submit your comments through the process during the comment period, which is identified in the rule itself. So substantial number. We wanted to note what may be a trivial number to a large health IT developer of certified health IT might be an important or consequential, substantial number for a small HIN or HIE. However, we propose in the alternative that we would, and thus we seek comment on, and again, for how to comment, look in the proposed rule itself in the Federal Register. We seek comment on whether we should instead construct the factor with a simple fixed threshold of more than 1 or more than another specific number somewhere between 1 and 10. Such fixed threshold would offer more simplicity to actors and potential requesters while also still assuring that an actor's practice would not fail to meet this factor on the basis of a single instance of a particular manner of access, exchange, or use of EHI. Also, to highlight similarly situated, this term should be familiar to information blocking actors, as we also used it in the fees and licensing exceptions. It would serve here as it does there to indicate that different specific individuals or entities within a class of such individuals or entities who are similarly situated to one another should be treated in a consistent and non-discriminatory manner. To further illustrate this provision, if an actor provides a certain form of EHI access to healthcare providers, then that same form of EHI access should arguably be made available to individuals, barring potential other considerations such as security or privacy concerns. To be clear, it is not our intent for the individuals or entities that are similarly situated to the requester facet of this proposed new condition to be used in a way that differentiates the same manner of access to EHI simply based on the requester's status, such as whether they are an individual, which we sometimes talk about as a patient, or they are an entity such as a hospital or health system or other organizational healthcare provider, for example. Next slide, please. Now, we are now finished our tour of proposed revisions and enhancements to the infeasibility exception and turn to the proposed additional condition, which would be another option for satisfying the manner exception. Now, if you're looking for the existing exception, you're going to want to look in 171-301. And it currently in the regulations is called the content and manner exception. We explain the update to the title in the HTI-1 proposed rule. The manner exception TESCA condition that we propose to add would offer qualified health information networks, participants and sub-participants in TEFCA the ability to fulfill EHI requests from any QHIN, participant, or sub-participant in TEFCA using TEFCA means, even if the requester would have preferred to use other means. We think in terms of benefits, some highlights include it aligns with the CARES Act's goals for interoperability and establishment of TEFCA by acknowledging the value of TEFCA in promoting access, exchange, and use of EHI in a secure and interoperable way. It facilitates a responding actor reaching agreeable terms with a requester to fulfill an EHI request, and it acknowledges that certain agreements have been reached for access, exchange, and use of EHI. It provides a clear, efficient process for actors participating in TEFCA to prioritize the use of TEFCA means for fulfilling requests for access, exchange, and use of EHI from other TEFCA entities. So this is a request from an entity that is partaking of TEFCA. They have chosen to partake of TEFCA themselves, and they're requesting that from someone else who has chosen to partake of TEFCA. Next slide, please. Now, opportunities to learn more and to comment. Next slide, please. The proposed rule includes requests for information specific to the topics that are on slide 42 here: laboratory data interoperability, pharmacy interoperability functionality within the ONC Health IT certification program, including real-time prescription benefit capabilities. And also, we request information on the FHIR standard, FHIR subscription, clinical decision support hooks, FHIR standard for scheduling, and smart health links. There may be other requests for comment associated with various proposals and other requests for information in the proposed rule, but we wanted to highlight for everyone here that these are included, these particular topics. Next slide, please. How to submit a comment. And here is one way to find the HTI rule. There are full instructions how to submit comments in the proposed rule itself, which is available right now on the Federal Register's website. And as I believe Cannon noted in the chat, in the coming days, we will post the public comment template and Word copy of the proposed rule on our website as discussed in the proposed rule. And we will also be posting the slides and the recording from today's webinar. Next slide. The resources there are some resources already available on healthit.gov. Visit the URL on the screen right now, healthit.gov/proposed rule, all one word, proposed rule, for additional information. More updates will be added over time. And there's 3 fact sheets already up, 2 more coming soon. And there is right now for the insights condition, a spec sheet posted for each of the 9 proposed measures. And is there one more slide? Yes, yes, there are a couple more slides. The HITAC, the Health IT Advisory Committee, has a proposed rule task force for HTI-1. This task force will evaluate and provide draft recommendations to the HITAC on the HTI-1 rule. All task force meetings are open to the public. Registration and meeting materials can be found at the link that's on the slide, which the slides will be posted in coming days. Next slide, please. And don't miss our upcoming webinars. You can visit, again, healthit.gov/proposed rule to find the list and the registration links for the upcoming webinars. And the upcoming webinars include a little deeper look at the DSI and algorithmic transparency proposals. That's on May 4th. The insights condition proposals on May 11th, and a deeper look into the information blocking proposals on May 18th. Next slide. And to wrap up, here's how to get in touch with ONC. And I'm not sure who I'm supposed to hand this back to at this point.
Hi, Rachel. I can take it since the person that you would have been handing back to otherwise is no longer here. Thank you, everyone, for joining. With that, we are going to wrap up. We got through quite a few questions. There are a few still left. We will stay on for a minute or two and try and answer a couple more of them. If we didn't get to your question, we do apologize. Again, I want to remind everyone that the responses to questions in general, if we said, please read the rule, there is a reason for that. As was noted at the beginning, the Administrative Procedure Act requires us to protect the integrity of the rulemaking process, which means that we cannot opine on the content in the NPRM. So if we are saying, please read the rule, it means that we can't provide you with further interpretation or guidance or opining on it. And we do suggest that you read the rule, provide us public comment, please, please, please. We do use that comment. We will use that comment to inform what we decide to put into the final rule. So we look forward to reading all of your inputs and all of your thoughts in your public comment. That comment period, as Rachel noted, is open through June 20th. And with that, we will close the microphones, but a few team members will stay on and see if we can't knock out one or two more questions. As mentioned in the chat as well, the recording and slides need to be made accessible, but then they will be posted on our website in the near future. And there will be a notice that goes out to everyone when that is posted live. So thank you all very much. We appreciate you joining us, and we hope this was helpful.